Good morning. I hope everyone had a good weekend, and we're going to try to get through bits of more of King Lear. In a lot of ways, I feel every time I start a presentation or start a lecture in class, I feel a bit like Lear in the storm because the play seems to swirl about like a storm most of the time, and I'm trying to tame it and make it accessible as best I can here. A quick reminder, we're doing Lear today, we're doing Lear on Wednesday, we're doing Lear on Friday. Friday's a student presentation. Friday is also the quiz. Quiz is 20 questions matching. Once again, I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible. I will do my best probably to give you some characters um, on Wednesday to kind of let you prepare a little bit for that. And I'm think I will probably even tell you if there are direct quotations. I will tell you which direct quotations are on the play or on the quiz as well. I think today what I want to do is get back to the basics. Basics for this class have been character, conflict, connection, and theme. I think we have done connection. If we haven't, we'll probably try to pick up a few more connections on Wednesday, but I think we have tried to make some connections with the play. I think all of the essay prep that we've talked about has been theme related. So I think we have covered the theme, and in a lot of ways, we have gone kind of above and beyond what we usually do for theme as we run through the play. I'm not sure we've done enough with character and conflict. So today I want to do at least a little bit of character and conflict. The conflicts. There are a lot of them. We begin with Lear versus his daughters. Cordelia did not say what he wanted to hear. That caused all sorts of problems. Regan and Goneril don't allow him to live with them or don't allow the knights to come along. They are plotting to basically get rid of him and take over the kingdom for themselves. You have Edmund versus Edgar, Edmund versus Gloucester. You have Lear versus Kent, where Lear is showing his insanity, but he kicks Kent out. We talked about Kent versus Oswald and Kent's uh, wonderful series of insults against Oswald. All of these fall into that personal, one on one sort of conflict. However, you kind of have more of that when you have Cornwall and Regan versus Gloucester. You have the servant who fights with Cornwall. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. You have Regan killing the servant. You have Goneril versus her husband Albany, and then you have Regan and Goneril fighting over Edmund. Again, personal conflicts abound in this play, and it's almost a soap opera. Or if you are, more Spanish inclined, it's a novella with alliances switching all of the time and things um, changing time after time. And I think that this is that sort of thing. And a lot of times we would treat that as something to laugh at. But here I think it lends itself to the tragedy. And then we have an internal conflict, Lear versus his madness. That conflict makes itself known or is illustrated, I think, in the storm. Edmund is fighting the societal conventions. France is going to war with England, and we have a fate versus free will undercurrent throughout the whole play. And so all sorts of conflicts keep building and building and building. And remember, conflicts are necessary to drive the plot. Conflicts oftentimes reveal the character. And because of conflicts revealing the character, I think it's important to understand that we should not be taking any of these things in isolation. How the conflicts are resolved lead us to the theme. How the characters are wind up at the end oftentimes lead us to the theme as well. So conflict and characterization usually is an element of theme. Let's take a look at perhaps the most famous scene in the play. It might be Shakespeare's most famous scene. It's Lear in the Storm. And you begin with this rage. Blow winds and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow. You cataracts and hurricanes spout till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks. You sulphurous and thought executing fires. And it just continues. And there's all of this rage. And singe my white head, and thou, all shaking thunder, strike the thick rotundity of the world. All of this anger and all of this rage screaming at a storm that is not going to listen to him. And it is Lear screaming at a world that is not going to listen to him. And it is, I think, in a lot of ways, the rage and anger that all of us get to at some point. But this screaming about drenching our steeples, in other words, flood this world so that it goes over the church steeples, so that the weather vanes are flooded. And I think there's the idea of thought executing fires, um, thinking about, you know, Lear's lack of reason. All right. And then if you look on the right side, still more rage, excuse me. And then linking the storm to the daughters. And then just kind of being spent. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, infirm, weak, and despised old man. But yet I call you servile ministers that will, with two pernicious daughters, join your high engendered battles gainst a head so old and white as this. Oh, 'tis foul. The whole idea that everything that's happening here is sort of symbolic of everything that's happening in his life. The lack of control of the storm, the lack of control in his life, that as an old man, he's out here being buffeted by family, being buffeted by nature, and his old white head doesn't have what it takes to kind of deal with all of this. And I think there's a huge pathos as one thinks about Lear's raging in the storm. And then this continues, and the whole idea of who he is. Let the great gods that keep this dreadful putter over our heads find out their enemies now. Tremble, thou wretch, that hast within thee undivulged crimes unwhipped of justice. Remember, we've talked about this idea of, is there justice possible? Is justice possible in this play? And the idea of crimes being confessed, crimes that should be dealt with justly. And then he's going through this whole list of crimes. And then he comes to this conclusion that he is a man more sinned against than sinning. It's one of the most famous quotations from the play. And it is the thing that I want you to take the daily writing and deal with. Is Lear correct when he asserts, I am a man more sinned against than sinning? Why or why not? Take some time, work your way through this thing, okay? Because I think it is to the character of Lear that he makes this statement. And one can look at the daughter should have treated him better. One can look at he should have listened to Kent and other people One can look at it that he should have known that dividing the kingdom was a bad idea. And more importantly, he should have known that, of course, the daughters are going to flatter him. And he should have trusted Cordelia's honesty over his other two daughters. All of those are possible. Just give me a thing of, is he a man more sinned against than sinning? Or is he responsible for everything that's happened to him? I want to talk about the fate versus free will element here. The Fool talks about winter's not gone yet, the idea that we are going to have bad things still coming. And then halfway down the speech, fortune that errant whore ne'er turns the key to the poor. Now there's the rhyme element here as well, but the idea that fortune is fickle, that fortune sells herself to the highest bidder. Okay. Fortune is a woman. And we talked about that idea of fortune as a woman from Machiavelli. Shakespeare uses it here. Shakespeare uses it in Hamlet. There are lots of spots where Shakespeare takes this idea of fortune being fickle. Gloucester also. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. The idea that the gods are capricious, the idea that the gods are cruel, that they are little boys who take the wings off of flies. There's a certain amount here of, if it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. And, the idea of luck being something that's not going to be good, not going to be staying with us. At the same time, what were the choices made? Gloucester chose Edmund over Edgar. He believed Edmund over Edgar, and it was that act of free will that led to the blinding, that led to the destruction. The same with Lear. So was it the gods and their power and their storm, or was it human action? It's one of the arguments about this play. It's one of the struggles in this play. It's one of the things that Shakespeare deals with quite frequently. And I think in a tragedy, it's a key element of any tragedy. Is this the gods? Or excuse me, are the gods causing this? Are the gods behind all of the bad things that are happening? Or is it human agency? And again, remember, one of the things with tragedy that we've talked about is the human is trying to assert his rightful place in the world. As these characters are trying to assert their rightful place in the world, are they creating the conditions that cause the misfortune? It's one of the questions I think tragedies force us to deal with. There's also this moment of clarity. If the storm is the most famous scene in King Lear, I think the most horrific scene that Shakespeare ever allowed on stage is Gloucester's blinding. And Gloucester's blinding gives him the sight that he's been wrong the whole time. That by siding with Edmund and banishing Edgar, he has been responsible for all of the bad stuff that's happening. He sees his foolishness. He sees his folly. And then he talks about the kind gods. Forgive me that. But just a little bit earlier, or a little bit later in the play, the gods are using us for our sport. It goes back to things, but he does have this moment of clarity. He seems to be able to have and maintain a moment of clarity in a way that Lear never can. Lear has a couple of moments, but he never can break free the way Gloucester seems to. So when we come to the character development, we have to remember that Gloucester does have this moment of clarity, that Gloucester is able to see the error of his ways. And when we start taking a look at what happens to characters throughout the rest of the play, how does this moment of clarity play out in the characterization? Then I think there's a moment of transformation. I think for a lot of this play, Regan has been sort of in the background. And we had Cordelia as the honest one and Goneril as the evil one. I think here we have Regan all of a sudden stepping up in a way that we hadn't seen before. And we'll pick up Regan's transformation a little bit more. But Cornwall is blinding Gloucester. A servant steps in and tells him that this is too far. You have gone a step too far. All right. Regan steps in. The servant is telling her to back down. If you wear a beard, I'd shake it in this quarrel. If you were a man, we'd fight. The Duke now steps in because his wife has been insulted. There's a fight, but Regan is the one who kills the peasant or kills the servant. And I think there's a lot of the servant has wounds Cornwall. That wound leads to Cornwall's death. But I think this act, Regan is now changed and is now equal with her sister. And we'll pick that up here as we go a little bit. But there's a moment of transformation. And remember, characterization often includes moments of clarity, like Gloucester had, moments of transformation, as Regan has here. And that's, I think, a key element of dealing with the play. She's coming into her own with this killing. The other thing, as a sort of side note here, is this, too, I think, is a sign of how out of hand things are. That a servant is standing up to the Duke, that a servant is one of the last ones left to fight for what at least we in 2021 would think is the right side, that a servant is the one trying to stand up and put an end to the cruelty, and certainly one of the cruelest acts on stage for Shakespeare, the blinding of Gloucester. Okay. Goneril, we've talked about before, but you'll notice there's a lot of Lady Macbeth here. I must change arms at home and give the distaff into my husband's hands. I'm going to be the man. And later on in the play, there's the line where Regan asks about whether Albany's soldiers are arrayed, and the messenger says that your sister is the better soldier. Also, though, Goneril is sort of a sexual being. This kiss, if it durst speak, would stretch thy spirits up into the air, conceive and fare thee well. In other words, think about what I've had to say, but think about the fact that, Edmund, it can be you and me. Okay. And then that flirtatious element, a little bit later, she goes after her husband as a milk-livered man, that bearest a cheek for blows, a head for wrong, who hast not in thy brows an eye discerning thine honor from thy suffering. You're just not a man. And we have her, wanting to take Edmund as a replacement for her husband Albany. And we have Regan, I think, showing her transformation here in this scene with Oswald. Oswald, remember, was described by Kent as this serviceable, as this officious, as this duty-doing person. And so I'm charged in this business. And then there seems to be this little flirtatious, why would my sister write to Edmund? Why doesn't she trust you to deliver the message, just tell you what to say? And I'll love thee much. Let me unseal the letter. And then Oswald objects. And then, I know your lady doesn't love the husband. I'm sure of that. And she kind of, made eyes and flirted with the noble Edmund. And I know you're of her bosom. And there's this double implication here that maybe you're sleeping with her. But certainly she tells you everything. And then all of a sudden, she is, go do this thing, go kill Gloucester. And she has Oswald wrapped around her finger. And I think it's a transformation brought about by the killing of the servant, where now she steps into her own, and I'm not going to take a backseat to my sister. I'm not going to let her have Edmund. I'm going to take Edmund. And this conflict is going to pick up. And more convenient is he for my hand than for your ladies. You may gather more if you do find him. Pray you give him this. And then she hands a token. Remember earlier that Goneril gave him, said, bow your head, and she either gave him a kiss or she gave him something around his neck. There's tokens being exchanged. Apparently, Edmund is the catch of the day. Okay. And then, by the way, go kill Gloucester. That'll be cool. And Oswald seems ready and willing to be wrapped around Regan's finger, excuse me, in the same way that, he allegedly was wrapped around Goneril's finger. I think this wraps it up. I hope everybody has a good week. We'll do some stuff on Wednesday to kind of deal with the ending of the play. I want to talk about Gloucester's attempted suicide, a few other things like that. I hope everybody has a good week, and we will see you on Wednesday.